The algorithmic foundations of differential privacy. Differential privacy describes a promise, made by a data holder or curator, to a data subject: you will not be affected, adversely or otherwise, by allowing your data to be used in any study or analysis, no matter what other studies, datasets, or information sources are available. At their best, differentially private database mechanisms can make confidential data widely available for accurate data analysis, without resorting to data clean rooms, data usage agreements, data protection plans, or restricted views. Nonetheless, data utility will eventually be consumed. The fundamental law of information recovery states that overly accurate answers to too many questions will destroy privacy in a spectacular way. The goal of algorithmic research on differential privacy is to postpone this inevitability as long as possible. Differential privacy addresses the paradox of learning nothing about an individual while learning useful information about a population. A medical database may teach us that smoking causes cancer, affecting an insurance company's view of a smoker's long-term medical costs. Has the smoker been harmed by the analysis? Perhaps his insurance. Premiums may rise if the insurer knows he smokes. He may also be helped learning of his health risks. He enters a smoking cessation program. Has the smoker's privacy been compromised? It is certainly the case that more is known about him after the study than was known before, but was his information leaked? Differential privacy will take the view that it was not, with the rationale that the impact on the smoker is the same independent of whether or not he was in the study. It is the conclusions reached in the study that affect the smoker, not his presence or absence in the dataset. Differential privacy ensures that the same conclusions, for example, smoking causes cancer, will be reached, independent of whether any individual opts into or opts out of the dataset. Specifically, it ensures that any sequence of outputs, responses to queries is essentially equally likely to occur, independent of the presence or absence of any individual. Here, the probabilities are taken over random choices made by the privacy mechanism, something controlled by the data curator, and the term essentially is captured by a parameter, Greek letter epsilon. A smaller Greek letter epsilon will yield better privacy and less accurate responses. Differential privacy is a definition, not an algorithm. For a given computational task T and a given value of Greek letter epsilon, there will be many differentially private algorithms for achieving T in a Greek letter epsilon differentially private manner. Some will have better accuracy than others. When Greek letter epsilon is small, finding a highly accurate Greek letter epsilon differentially private algorithm for T can be difficult, much as finding a numerically stable algorithm for a specific computational task can require effort. This section motivates and presents the formal definition of differential privacy, and enumerates some of its key properties. After reviewing a few probabilistic tools, we present the Laplace mechanism, which gives differential privacy for real vector, valued queries. An application of this leads naturally to the exponential mechanism, which is a method for differentially private selection from a discrete set of candidate outputs. We then analyze the cumulative privacy loss incurred by composing multiple differentially private mechanisms. Finally, we give a method, the sparse vector technique, for privately reporting the outcomes of a potentially very large number of computations, provided that only a few are significant. In this section, we describe some of the most basic techniques in differential privacy that we will come back to use again and again. The techniques described here form the basic building blocks for all of the other algorithms that we will develop. The following concentration inequalities will frequently be useful. We state them in easy-to-use forms rather than in their strongest forms. One of the most fundamental primitives in private data analysis is the ability to answer numeric valued queries on a dataset. In the last section, we began to see tools that would allow us to do this by adding independently drawn noise to the query answers. In this section, we continue the study and see that by instead adding carefully correlated noise, we can gain the ability to privately answer vastly more queries to high accuracy. Here, we see two specific mechanisms for solving this problem, which we will generalize in the next section. In this section, we consider algorithms for solving the query release problem with better accuracy than we would get by simply using compositions of the Laplace mechanism. The improvements are possible because the set of queries is handled as a whole, even in the online setting, permitting the noise on individual queries to be correlated. To immediately see that something along these lines might be possible, consider the pair of queries in the differencing attack described in section 1. How many people in the database have the sickle cell trait and how many people, not named X, in the database have the sickle cell trait? Suppose a mechanism answers the first question using the Laplace mechanism, and then, when the second question is posed, responds, you already know the approximate answer, because you just asked me almost the exact same question. This coordinated response to the pair of questions incurs no more privacy loss than either question would do taken in isolation, so a small privacy savings has been achieved. In this section, we generalize the query release algorithms of the previous section. As a result, we get bounds for arbitrary low sensitivity queries, not just linear queries, as well as new bounds for linear queries. These generalizations also shed some light on a connection between query release and machine learning. The small dB offline query release mechanism in section 4 is a special case of what we call the net mechanism. We saw that both mechanisms in that section yield synthetic databases, which provide a convenient means for approximating the value of any query in Q on the private database. Just evaluate the query on the synthetic database and take the result as the noisy answer. More generally, a mechanism can produce a data structure of arbitrary form that, together with a fixed, public, algorithm, independent of the database, provides a method for approximating the values of queries. The net mechanism is a straightforward generalization of the small dB mechanism. First, fix, independent of the actual database, and Greek letter alphabet of data structures such that evaluation of any query in Q using the release data structure gives a good, within an additive Greek letter alpha error, estimate of the value of the query on the private database. Next, apply. In the previous sections, we have focused on the problem of private query release, in which we insist on bounding the worst-case error over all queries. Would our problem be easier if we instead asked only for low error on average, given some distribution over the queries? In this section, we see that the answer is no, given a mechanism which is able to solve the query release problem with low average error given any distribution on queries. We can boost it into a mechanism which solves the query release problem to worst-case error. This both sheds light on the difficulty of private query release, and gives us a new tool for designing private query release algorithms. Boosting is a general and widely used me. In this section, we briefly describe two general techniques, both enjoying unconditional privacy guarantees, that can often make life easier for the data analyst, especially when dealing with a function that has arbitrary, or difficult to analyze, worst-case sensitivity. These algorithms are most useful in computing functions that, for some exogenous reason, the analyst has reason to believe are usually insensitive in practice. In this section, we investigate various lower bounds and trade-offs. 1. How inaccurate must responses be in order not to completely destroy any reasonable notion of privacy? 2. How does the answer to the previous question depend on the number of queries? 3. Can we separate Greek letter epsilon, 0, differential privacy from Greek letter epsilon, Greek letter delta, differential privacy in terms of the accuracy each permits for? Is there an intrinsic difference between what can be achieved for linear queries and for arbitrary low sensitivity queries while maintaining Greek letter epsilon, 0, differential privacy? A different flavor of separation result distinguishes the computational complexity of generating a data structure handling all the queries in a given class from that of generating a synthetic database that achieves the same goal. We postpone a discussion of this result to section 9. Our discussion of differential privacy has so far ignored issues of computational complexity, permitting both the curator and the adversary to be computationally unbounded. In reality, both curator and adversary may be computationally bounded. Confining ourselves to a computationally bounded curator restricts what the curator can do, making it harder to achieve differential privacy. And indeed, we will show an example of a class of counting queries that, under standard complexity theoretic assumptions, does not permit efficient generation of a synthetic database, even though inefficient algorithms, such as small dB and private multiplicative weights, are known. Very roughly, the database rows are digital signatures, signed with keys to which the curator does not have access. The intuition will be that any row in a synthetic database must either be copied from the original, violating privacy, or must be a signature on a new message, that is, a forgery, violating the unforgeability property of a digital signature scheme. Unfortunately, this state of affairs is not limited to potentially contrived examples based on digital signatures. It is even difficult to create a synthetic database that maintains relatively accurate two-way marginals, one on the positive side. Given a set Q of queries and an n-row database with rows drawn from a universe X, a synthetic database can be generated in time polynomial in n, x, and q. If we abandon the goal of a synthetic database and content ourselves with a data structure from which we can obtain a relatively accurate approximation to the answer to each query, the situation is much more interesting. It turns out that the problem is intimately related to the tracing traitors problem, in which the goal is to discourage piracy while distributing digital content to paying customers. If the adversary is restricted to polynomial time, then it becomes easier to achieve differential privacy. In fact, the immensely powerful concept of secure function evaluation yields a natural way to avoid the trusted curator, while giving better accuracy than randomized response, as well as a natural way to allow multiple trusted curators, who for legal reasons cannot share their datasets, to respond to queries on what is effectively a merged dataset. Briefly put, secure function evaluation is a cryptographic primitive that permits a collection of n parties page 1, page 2, Pn, of which fewer than some fixed fraction are faulty. The fraction varies according to the type of faults. For honest but curious faults, the fraction is 1, to cooperatively compute any function f, x1, xn, where 11 is the input, or value, of party pi, in such a way that no coalition of faulty parties can either disrupt the computation or learn more about the values of the non-faulty parties than can be deduced from the function output and the values of the members of the coalition. These two properties are traditionally called correctness and privacy. This privacy notion, let us call it SFV privacy, is very different from differential privacy. Let V be the set of values held by the faulty parties, and let pi be a non-faulty party. 2SFV privacy permits the faulty parties to learn 11 if 11 can be deduced from V, F, X1, Xn. Differential privacy would therefore not permit exact release of F, X1, Xn. However, secure function evaluation. One of the most useful tasks in data analysis is machine learning, the problem of automatically finding a simple rule to accurately predict certain unknown characteristics of never-before-seen data. Many machine learning tasks can be performed under the constraint of differential privacy. In fact, the constraint of privacy is not necessarily at odds with the goals of machine learning, both of which seem to extract information from the distribution from which the data was drawn, rather than from individual data points. In this section, we survey a few of the most basic results on private machine learning, without attempting to cover this large field completely. The goal in machine learning is very often similar to the goal in private data analysis. The learner typically wishes to learn some simple rule that explains a dataset. However, she wishes this rule to generalize. That is, it should be that the rule she learns not only correctly describes the data that she has on hand, but that it should also be able to correctly describe new data that is drawn from the same distribution. Generally, this means that she wants to learn a rule that captures distributional information about the data set on hand, in a way that does not depend too specifically on any single data point. Of course, this is exactly the goal of private data analysis, to reveal distributional information about the private dataset, without revealing too much about any single individual in the dataset. It should come as no surprise then that machine learning and private data analysis are closely linked. In fact, as we will see, we are often able to perform private machine learning nearly as accurately, with nearly the same number of examples as we can perform non-private machine learning. So far, we have made some implicit assumptions about the model of private data analysis. For example, we have assumed that there is some trusted curator who has direct access to the private dataset, and we have assumed that the adversary only has access to the output of the algorithm, not to any of its internal state during its execution. But what if this is not the case? What if we trust no one to look at our data, even to perform the privacy-preserving data analysis? What if some hacker might gain access to the internal state of the private algorithm while it is running? In this section, we relax some of our previously held assumptions and consider these questions. In this section, we describe some additional computational models that have received attention in the literature.